there are huge problems with the open air fish markets in New York City. The issue is the degree to which we tolerate certain things, as to your point about, Islam is going to treat women very differently. We end up seeing female genital mutilation in some places. So it's well past our boundaries. But in New York, for instance, you have open fish markets, and New Yorkers have complained about the smell and moved out of these areas because the government is unwilling to do anything about it. The problem is substantially less than people being killed or being beaten.
That's the point.
It's still a problem for the people who once lived in New York and called it home.
That's the point that I'm making, though. Like, sometimes you can have these groups of people, different groups of people with different cultural backgrounds, and they'll be able to function in a society. Sure, there will be some displacement of people that live there currently because they don't want to live around what have you, a fish market and stuff. But if you look at the Muslim communities, they're doing things like, they're doing calls to prayer 5 times a day. I've seen a bunch of videos of large groups of Muslims laying out their prayer rugs in the middle of their street and praying, intentionally to disrupt the society that they live with. And I think that the point that I'm making is, whereas you can deal with some cultures the way that they behave, like the open air fish markets that you're talking about, sure, like I said, there will be some displacement, but there are some that are there specifically to disrupt the existing society.
Right. It's the degrees of. Yeah. So you were saying that we don't have the problems from other cultures. I'm just saying we do. I actually think it's a bit more pernicious when it comes from these tolerable actions, which are detrimental to society, such as you have fish guts in the streets in New York in certain areas. It's disgusting. And I often point out the city smells like sour milk because there are certain food practices that shouldn't be tolerated. The issue then is, I'll throw it to the Antifa, the political violence conversation we've had over the past several years in why it is that you often hear in the media how the right is more violent and the left is not. It's because what I would describe for the right is when you hear some kind of right-adjacent political violence, it is extremely rare, but it is extremely acute. That is, a guy with a gun shoots a bunch of people. It doesn't represent the majority of Republicans. In fact, most Republicans would denounce almost every idea this person has, but it makes headlines everywhere. When you have 3,000 Antifa punching people in the face, not a single one of those stories makes national headlines. So that's blunt. That's the blunt force political violence versus the acute or the obtuse. So Antifa, as you're aware, you've probably seen Antifa beat old ladies. It never makes national news. So you can have. There was a period where Breitbart was tracking every act of political violence against Trump supporters. And there was a list in like 1 year of 900 attacks. But they're all small blips. No one really cares that a guy got punched in the back of the head. One time in 3 or 4 years, a guy who's screaming about, some fringe far-right ideology shoots up a bunch of people. It's in the news for decades. And so that's what we're dealing with right now. I actually think it's all bad. But to the point, Phil, about, Islam, that's the acute violent problem. A guy comes up to National Guardsmen and kills them versus the obtuse. There's fish guts in the streets in New York City. And what happens with these is the problem isn't enough for the city to react. Most people are just slowly pushed away by it. Yep. And then eventually you get entrenched enclaves and the people who live there give up and leave.
Do you think
bad?
Do you think that most Americans are more inclined to say, you know what, I don't mind the Chinese people that have an open air fish market as opposed to the Muslims that are stopping traffic and possibly doing things like the
I think the point is the videos we've seen of them doing, there's one where it's they're at an airport and they're all blocking the vending machines, and they did not need to block the vending machines. Although there's been a fact check where they said that they intentionally went to an area that was away from they had asked in advance. But there are videos of them on the sidewalk in the streets and doing these things. And if you say it's intentionally disruptive, we're talking about, again, an acute issue most people are instantly offended by. Mm-hmm. I actually argue we can easily say that terrorism is a worse problem than anything. It's a permanent, terrifying, and massively politically impactful action that is worse than anything any other culture has done when they've done something bad. However, as I mentioned, it is worse in many ways because it is pernicious. in these, the example being the open air fish markets, because what happens is they set it up, and there's a bunch of people who live in an area, and they go to the local place and say, hey, this smells really bad. Like, I live here, I own property. We can't have this. And he goes, there's nothing illegal about them selling fish. So one person moves in and opens a shop and puts a bunch of dead fish on ice in front of their store on the sidewalk. And they say there's no law for it. There's no unity because this one neighborhood can never get an ordinance passed because their city rep goes to legislation and says, guys, we got to deal with these open air fish markets. And the rest of them say it doesn't affect our neighborhood, so we're not opening legislation on this one. So what happens? The people who own property now see their property values are collapsing, and they all leave one at a time, and then their neighborhoods they fall into disrepair, or they get taken over by other cultures that are tolerant of open air fish markets. That is terrifying as to what that means for this country if we don't enforce our cultural values and say, we have a law in the book saying you can't put a pie on the windowsill on certain days. Please don't put dead fish on ice in front of all these stores. It's not pleasant. I don't know, Elaad, if you've experienced like the New York fish markets. I don't like going there.
No, they're very trashy, but it's mostly only Chinese people down there. And if you go in the neighborhoods, you're like,
why.
Yeah, you're looked at differently too. Like you're out of place if you.
But it's not that it's these open air fish markets. They border the shopping districts, and it's like Lower East Side. There's a lot of to put it simply, it's not the worst problem in the world. No one really ever talks about it because it just smells bad. No, you just move. Your property value is going to go down, so you move. That is worrying in that our communities that were built and established by the men and women who came before us would be lost because we tolerate other cultures doing things that are disruptive. And that's not, for all I know, these people show up and said, we have to open as many open air fish markets as possible, and then the property values will drop and we'll seize it all. I don't think that's the case. But whether it's intentional or otherwise, it is disruptive. It does cause us problems. And I think the big picture is we have to be more cognizant of this multicultural change that's been happening in this country for 50, 60 years and recognize it's going to destabilize our government. Nay, it has destabilized our country and government. And now we have a kleptocracy where basically every politician is trying to just extract as much as they can from the system. They don't actually want to solve problems. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't know what I defended her a little bit when she announced she was leaving. I said, this sucks. She's been great. And then Mike Cernovich says, I don't know if you guys saw this. He tweeted at her, you need to finish your term. And then she makes some weird fake virtue signal, a man telling a woman to be in the kitchen. And I'm like, you know what, man? The reason I bring her up is that people are pointing out she set a retirement for just after her pension vests so she can leave and get paid. This is the kleptocracy of a country we live in. Everybody getting in, Tim Waltz, whoever it's going to be, they get in and say, okay, now that I'm in, how can I set myself up for life and watch look, it's all burning down. What do I care?
Just to argue on that Marjorie Taylor Greene point, the congressional pension is not much money. Once you consider in particular that Marjorie Taylor Greene was already very rich going into Congress.
I get it.
I don't think that makes any big difference. I think it was a big FU to Mike Johnson. I think that's who it was directed towards. But I think she needs to understand that it's also an FU to everybody who voted for her to serve out a 2-year term in the House of Representatives. I do think that while we're sitting here arguing and reconsidering whether or not if importing the third world will turn us into it, I'm satisfied that it seems as though that the administration understands that it indeed is. And I'm also very grateful at this point that the president isn't letting a so-called good crisis go to waste. I hate saying that because it makes me kind of sound like a piece of shit. But the president, after this happened, sent out a Truth Social where he said, I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover, terminate all of the millions of illegal Biden admissions, including those signed by Sleepy Joe Biden's auto pen, and remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States.
Let's go.
This was also followed up, one last thing, Tim, with what the administration is actually doing too now is halting the processing of all immigration requests from Afghanistan. They also ordered a review of all green cards issued to individuals from 19 countries and threatened a wider crackdown on migrants from what, again, he called third world countries. So this is a serious backlash to this one event, and I'm glad that the president and administration is taking this seriously.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.